Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony Mancuso, and I serve as the Communications and Outreach Senior Specialist for the Summer Health Professions Education Program, also known as SHPEP. For those of you who are unaware, SHPEP is a free 6-week summer enrichment program for college freshmen and sophomore students who are interested in the health professions. Our application deadline is February 5th, and to learn more, please visit shpep.org. During today's session, please use the Q&A feature to ask your questions. And as always, our webinars are posted on our YouTube channel within a week of the live viewing. Now, I'll turn it over to our presenters to discuss the ID profession. And I will first start with Dr. Tan. Dr. Tan, may you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. And I just want to welcome everybody to this webinar. My name is Dr. Tina Tan. I'm a professor of pediatrics at the Feinberg School of Medicine of Northwestern University, and I'm a pediatric infectious diseases specialist at Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. I think ID is probably one of the most exciting fields that you can go into because it really does encompass aspects of all different branches of medicine. And I guess the first thing people always ask is, what does it take to get to an ID specialist, whether you're in pediatrics or in adult medicine? So you would need to have 4 years of college. You need to have 4 years of medical school, 3 years of a residency if you're going into a pediatric or medicine residency, and then 3 years of a subspecialty fellowship in infectious diseases. And one of the greatest things about ID is its diversity. A lot of us do clinical medicine, which is where we do take care of patients and deal with the infectious disease issues that they have. And I'm sure everybody now is aware of COVID and all the problems and other issues that arise with COVID. And it really is the infectious disease specialists, the infectious disease scientists, public health individuals, epidemiologists that are all working together to really take care of the patients that have COVID, come up with different treatments for COVID, as well as development of the vaccines that we use to protect against COVID. And it's a very rapidly moving dynamic field that really is very, very interesting and has many aspects that are different that many people can be interested in. So when you take care of somebody that has an infection, people usually present to you with what we call a chief complaint or a chief problem. Many times that problem might be, I've been having a fever for a long period of time, or I might have a rash for a long period of time. And, the job of the ID specialist really is to figure out what is going on with this individual, whether it is an infection causing it, and then how we can treat that infection. Other aspects of the ID job include the use of antibiotics and monitoring the use of antibiotics to make sure that they're not being overused, because antibiotic resistance really now is a major problem. There's a lot of opportunities for research, as Dr. DaCosta will talk about, which really are critical roles that these scientists play in helping us to take care of individuals with infectious diseases. And then the public health role is extraordinarily important. This is something that I think many people are seeing now during this COVID pandemic, where you really need these public health officials to look at what the rates of infection are, what the rates of hospitalization are, and really try to figure out the best way to bring these rates down and to control the pandemic. So there are many different aspects of infectious diseases that you can pursue. As a pediatrician, I tend to take care of people 18 years of age and younger, but I also do take care of young adults. And there are a multitude of issues that present in very young babies that are not seen in older children and adolescents. So you really do need to know about the different disease states that can occur in persons of different ages. And I think that's what makes infectious disease so exciting, is that there really are multiple different avenues that you can take depending upon your interest, multiple different age groups that you can work with. And it's a very gratifying, very satisfying field to know that you're able to contribute to improving the health of other individuals. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Malani.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tan. And I just wanted to add my welcome to everyone. I'm really excited. There are a lot of participants today, and the program that you're in just sounds absolutely fabulous. I think I would have really benefited from that when I was earlier in my career. So like Dr. Tan, I am an infectious disease physician, but unlike Dr. Tan, I actually take care of adults. And in fact, in addition to infectious disease, I am trained in geriatrics and palliative care. So I have an interest in people who are at the very other extreme of the age spectrum. And for me, having both of these pieces of training has really been vital. I talk about feeling like I'm bilingual, like I can really think about things a little bit differently, not just what bacteria and what drug, but really like, can this person go home safely? Will they be able to walk again? What about their memory, their caregivers? And COVID has been very, very difficult for older adults, as all of you know. So I am a professor of medicine at the University of Michigan, and I've spent a lot of my time here. I went to school here and grew up nearby. I've had a lot of different roles over the years in infectious disease. I still take care of patients, and I used to take care of patients who have transplants, so kidneys and lungs and liver, as well as bone marrow transplants. So people who have diseases of the blood, usually leukemia and otherwise. So these days I'm pretty general. A lot of the things I might see are infections after surgery. If you have a artificial knee put in and it gets infected, I would be the person that works with the surgeon to help make that better. And you could have pneumonia, you could have a urinary infection. You could have fever after traveling, and it is a big variety. Just like Dr. Tan said, it really is interesting, and I'm really always learning doing this. And like the path that she laid out, the path for infectious disease in adults is also extended after medical school, doing a residency and fellowship. And in my case, I did an additional year in geriatrics. Many people who do adult infectious diseases also take care of patients with HIV. And that has become like a primary care type of care these days. So when I trained, people were in the hospital. These days, it's very rare to see someone who has HIV in the hospital, but it is a sort of a different type of medical care, a lot more long-term, a lot of focus on prevention, and again, more like a primary care physician than an infectious disease doctor in many ways. And I actually don't see patients with HIV in my practice anymore. I did years ago, but it's become its own specialty within infectious disease. These days, I do a couple things that I think are a little bit different, that are adding to the diversity aspect. I am the University of Michigan's Chief Health Officer, and I've had that role since 2017, which means I am an advisor to the university president on all aspects of health and well-being. And of course, the last couple of years, it's been very, very focused on COVID and the pandemic response. But I also think about mental health and benefits design. And I think of myself as sort of the Surgeon General for campus, the voice that a lot of people hear and listen to. And a lot of it has been around crisis communication, including a lot of things happening today on my campus, because it is still pretty noisy here. It's not back to something that feels normal. And of course, all of you are students at some point in your training. And so this is something that I'm sure resonates with you. The other thing I do some research. These days, my research is directing the National Poll on Healthy Aging, which is a longitudinal poll. So it happens over time, over and over. And we look at all aspects of health and healthcare and well-being for 50 to 80-year-olds. And that is more of a policy flavor, which again, I think it just shows the ability to be really different in your role. And then the other thing I do is I am an associate editor at a medical journal called JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association. And I do a lot of different things there. I take care of manuscripts and articles that are related to infectious diseases, but I also edit a column on narrative medicine. And I help out, like earlier today, I did an interview with one of the leaders at the CDC talking about vaccines. So, you know, for me, I feel like infectious disease is something that I can keep recreating myself. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do next year or the year after that, but I think it's going to be really cool. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dr. DaCosta. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and welcome everyone. Nice segue from Dr. Malani, because talking about the multiple facets of what she does, it very much resonates with me. My background is really very varied. I've trained on 3 continents, in Africa, in the United Kingdom, where I did most of my training, and then subsequently here in the States as well. I have always had an affinity for bugs, or anything that crawls, or anything that infects. And that's really steered my career in a number of directions. Fundamentally, initially, I trained as a medical microbiologist, trained in the lab, trained in the bench. Subsequently, did a lot of research in immunology, did a PhD in immunology in the United Kingdom. And I always thought I would be an academic. I started off in academia, but soon after I came to the United States, I practiced for a while, and then I segued into industry. I found a niche in industry for translational research, which is where you actually do research that is likely to have an impact on patient care, as to purely scientific research that might be more interesting from a very cerebral standpoint. So I've always emphasized on doing work that potentially is going to have a global impact, or an impact more profound than what I think of as the revolving door of patient care. To go beyond that and do research that's going to have a broader impact. And that's what's driven me into industry. I really wanted to talk more about the career options for research from an infectious disease perspective, which are really very, very broad. So the settings, I talked about academia, academic research, which is a natural progression for a lot of you who will go into academic environments, who will become professors such as Tina and Preeti, and will continue to do research, scientific research and clinical research. Moving on to clinical research, which is in various settings, in academic settings, of course, where you have the principal and sub-investigators for a variety of clinical trials that are going to inform clinical practice for every aspect of clinical practice that is evidence-based. But also industry, working hand in glove with industry, where the drugs are actually developed and actually manufactured ultimately, and actually commercialized for use by the public. And this includes various settings. So you have the large pharma that you all know about, the likes of the Mercks and the GSKs and the Pfizers, producing lots of drugs, and more recently, some of the vaccines that you're very familiar with for COVID and other diseases. But also biotechnology companies, or biotech, where a lot of the really cutting edge science is developed that feeds into large pharma. And companies like Moderna, for instance, come to mind, where the science behind mRNA has been translated into a product. And of course, Pfizer also has a similar product. And other biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies using a range of technologies to address various diseases. Coronavirus disease is really very interesting because it really draws from a fantastic range of technologies, from RNA that you've heard about, viral vectored vaccines, which are different, such as the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines you've heard about, from recombinant proteins, which are many other vaccines now being approved, including Novavax, which has most recently been approved in Europe and is poised for approval in the US. And, just a whole range of technologies. But there are also non-profit aspects of science and translation that are outside of industry and biotech, which do have a profit side to them, for-profit side to them. We're looking at the likes of the Gates Foundation, which you're all aware of. That's more in the public health realm, sort of interface between science, translational science, and public health. You're also talking about the likes of the Wellcome Trust, mainly in the United Kingdom, but with a global impact as well. And then my organization, SETI, which really was born out of the Wellcome Trust, and the Gates Foundation. So CEPI is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. And we're very much behind a lot of the vaccines that you hear about. We're the unseen face of, for instance, the Moderna vaccine was initially started with a grant from CEPI. And that really steered the way to what we call a proof of concept for that vaccine that subsequently became possible to translate into the clinic and to have as a vaccine that's used in people today. We're also behind the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. A lot of people don't know that, one which has been successful in some ways and has challenges in other ways, ongoing challenges, mostly in Europe, but also globally. Most recently, the Novavax vaccine that has just been approved was also heavily supported by our organization, not just from a funding standpoint. We fund a lot of scientific research, but we also provide technical expertise for research and development, which is where I work, and also manufacturing expertise and regulatory expertise and that sort of thing to approve, to help vaccines be approved. It's important to mention government agencies like the NIH and the NIAID. So the National Institutes of Health, which has many subdivisions, one of which is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which Tina and Preeti will be pretty much, very much involved with, I'm sure, in your work. These are organizations that I almost on a daily basis have interactions with to try to work collaboratively with them to translate what they're doing, fund what they're doing, provide technical expertise to various developers of vaccines that will move the science in terms of vaccine development. Today, we are facing a pandemic that is really showing many different faces and many different facets, very unpredictable, as we've seen recently. Even the scientists and physicians have not been able to give a prediction in the short to medium term of what's going to happen next. We don't know when the next variant of the virus is going to emerge. One of the things that CEPI is working on, and that I lead at CEPI, is a group known as the Broadly Protective Beta Coronavirus Vaccine Group. We work with various developers to develop vaccines that ultimately will preempt pre-emergent variants of concern that haven't yet emerged, but preempt them and prevent them from establishing themselves. We do this by looking at the science, the immunology, to look at how we can broadly protect against a variety of related coronaviruses that cause various types of disease that might emerge in future or that are present already. So very exciting research. There's so much scope to go into a variety of things. I just gave a snapshot there of whether you go into academia, industry, you're in the bench, you do field research, you work on the actual vaccines themselves, help to develop them. There are so many opportunities for infectious diseases. I would argue more so than most other subspecialties within medicine. And I'll stop at that point and perhaps pass it back to you, Tony. Thank you. Tony, I think, are you in mute, Tony? I can't hear you.
Sorry, I just realized I was on mute. Thanks for that. So, this is great. I'm glad we were able to share this information to kind of give us like this overview. And, I did see a couple questions start to trickle in, and I do see this one right here. And it says, what is the benefit or difference of working in ID with an MD versus an MPH?
So I think I can take that one. An MPH is really a master of public health. So it's working more on the public health side where you're looking at epidemiology of diseases and outbreaks. Whereas with an MD, you really are taking care of patients. And in the case with Dr. DaCosta, the MD is actually helping him with his research because he does have a better understanding of what patients need in order to get better. So it does help guide him with regards to the development of drugs and vaccines and other things because he does have the background of having taken care of patients.
Thank you for that. And, before this session even started, I actually received a question from a pre-health advisor via email. And really, this pre-health advisor wants to know how they can help their students make connections with programs to leverage their preparation for a career in ID.
That's a great question. And the Infectious Disease Society of America actually does have some programs. This is one of them that we are collaborating with. SHPEP, in order to really help those individuals that are interested in ID sort of move forward with, their interest. So, this is just one program, but the Infectious Disease Society of America would be a place to start in order to, look at other potential programs that you can work with in order to get your students down that road of interest in infectious diseases.
Yeah, I'll just add that there are actually pretty robust medical student, there are like grants and research opportunities where IDSA does offer support for work in the summer and to attend, hopefully eventually we're going to be back to in-person meetings. The last couple of, of course, were virtual, but eventually we'll be back to meeting. And those are really great meetings to go to. And I'll just add with the MPH, a lot of students have been doing this, they do a 5-year, they'll do medicine and their MPH together potentially, or sometimes like they're not sure what they want to do, or maybe they want to just improve their academic record a little bit. And so they might do an MPH before medical school.
Mm-hmm.
I actually did an MS in public health, and it was focused on research design and statistical analysis, clinical research design and statistical analysis. I actually didn't do this till I was an assistant professor. And at that time, it was also really helpful to me because I was very focused in what I needed to learn. So I think learning is always good. There are a lot of different MPH programs. They're not all the same. And I would just advise to take a very close look at the program. There's some programs that I'm not sure that the skills are necessarily going to be that helpful unless you really get the right type of classes. So in biostatistics and I see Tina is nodding her head. I'm actually surprised that there are MPH programs out there that I'm not sure what, maybe for health promotion or something, it would be helpful, but for infectious disease, in terms of doing research or doing public health, you will want that quantitative piece. So really like the stuff that's harder, frankly, it's epidemiology and biostats is harder work, in terms of math and that, but it can be really a lot of fun and can help make sense of some things that don't make sense to people also.
I mean, that's the beauty of ID, is that you can go in multiple different directions and they all kind of complement each other to where you ultimately want to be. I think, as you heard, all of us sort of wear different hats. Many of us are clinicians. I know Dr. DaCosta is in the lab, which is extraordinarily important because it is critical. What he does supports us as clinicians to take care of patients. And Dr. Milani and myself are both an academic, so we do wear multiple hats. We're clinicians. We also direct different programs. So I'm the medical director for the International Patient and Destination Services program here. I'm the medical director for the International Adoption Clinic, travel medicine. So there are many different avenues you can take. I also do more clinical research, not bench research, and most of my research revolves around vaccine preventable diseases and vaccines and education of both healthcare providers and of the public on the importance of vaccines and the impact that they can have on controlling infectious diseases. And then I do something that's a little bit more bench in that I also study an organism called Streptococcus pneumoniae and the impact that pneumococcal vaccines have had on the burden of disease that is seen both in the pediatric and the adult realm. And then I hold other hats. I also am editor-in-chief of Contemporary Pediatrics, which is a general pediatric journal. I'm editor of one of the books that the American Academy of Pediatrics puts out, which is the Red Book Atlas, which is a compendium that accompanies the Red Book. And the Red Book really is the infectious disease guidelines for pediatricians, but also adult medicine individuals do use that. So, I think what all of us are trying to say is that in infectious diseases, there are a number of different avenues that you can pursue that, are tailored toward your interest.
Absolutely. And I'll say just a few words about the MPH in industry. In my experience in industry, having worked for a number of large pharma companies and biotechs, is that I've come across a lot of colleagues who have had MPHs. And as Dr. Malani alluded to, the important thing is, if you know where you're going as a path, to think about what you want to do in your MPH, because there are so many different forms of MPH, and the content varies so widely. And I would argue, and I think this is what Dr. Malani said as well, is that some of them really don't provide the kind of content that translates into the roles that you want to have in industry, for instance. But the epidemiology, the biostatistics are always very important. Translational research in patients who are receiving the various drugs that are developed by industry, what we call phase 4 studies, are very much informed by a lot of what you can learn in MPH programs. So there are a lot of good MPH programs, but choose very carefully based on what you think you're going to be doing in future, because you can go in various directions with an MPH.
And I'll just tag on that you can also get some of those skills without doing the formal full degree. And so, there are options, like if you are further along in your training and you're like, should I pause and go do an MPH? I really just want to be done. And that's understandable. Plus, it's, for many people, it's more debt, it's more time away. So, you have to balance these things. If you do the MPH later, that's okay. There might be options, especially tied to fellowship, where the place you do fellowship, they may support that, which is a really nice way to spend like a third year or fourth year of fellowship. But you can also learn biostatistics and epidemiology and clinical trials design in chunks. There are summer courses where you could do this intensive couple-week course. So, again, I think this is where it's very hard early in your journey to really know where you're going to be. But an MPH is always a plus.
Yeah, there's also now masters in clinical epidemiology that many both residents and fellows do take in order to get more experience with things that you might learn in an MPH. So, that's another way to do it. And you can always take courses, public health courses, when you're in college that do focus on biostatistics and epidemiology.
Absolutely.
It's a good point. And these days, there's actually bachelors in public health that are relatively new. At the University of Michigan, there is an offering for a bachelor's in public health, and it's pretty competitive, to get in after 2 years. But that is one of the most common pre-med tracks now. So, or I should say, the people doing that program, a large portion of them are interested in medical school. And I believe Hopkins also now has an undergraduate program, and many, many other schools of public health.
Thank you for those answers. And I noticed, just being on this call and getting to know each and every one of you, each of you are an MD, right? Now, how does DO fit into all of this? And is it commonplace for them to work as ID specialists?
Yeah.
So DO is just another way of getting a medical degree. It's a little bit different from an MD in that there is some holistic aspects that are associated with a DO, but in essence, you are a medical doctor and you do deal with patients. And there are DOs in ID because they do residencies, they do fellowships, very much like an MD person would. And they do fellowships in infectious diseases. And I encourage individuals that are DOs to consider infectious disease as a career.
At the University of Michigan, I can think of 2 recent fellows, and I mean recent, like the last 15 years. And we actually have a current fellow who is a DO. So again, I think that main thing is to do well in school, wherever you are, and wherever you train for internal medicine or pediatrics. But infectious disease fellowship is is one of the less competitive fellowships compared to cardiology and gastroenterology, and there's a number of reasons around that, but we have a very, very diverse group of people, and that's actually one of our strengths. Is that people who have a different training path actually bring diversity of thought into infectious disease, and that's actually really important for what we do, because there are no answers sometimes to what we do. And like, you can just look around, like who could have imagined our world a few years ago, like to being like this.
Dr. DaCosta, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, perhaps just to expand on the facets of infectious disease. Based on my past experiences, ID physicians have segued into other professions. For instance, with the FDA, drug regulation. There are a lot of infectious disease physicians that now sit on various committees that ultimately are responsible for approving drugs, for looking at continuing drug safety after approval, making sure that drugs that are harmful are pulled from the market. A lot of people that have an infectious disease background within the FDA set up, mostly for drugs related to infections, of course, but more broadly than that. I think that's a growing field. I do some work, consulting work with the FDA as well, so I know that there are a number of ID physicians within that group. Wound care, I've actually worked in my clinical practice years. I did some work in wound care and hyperbaric medicine, and a variety of physicians go into that, from various specialties, from surgical to medical. But ID physicians increasingly are finding that a lot of elderly patients with various types of wounds have infection as an issue, and that's drawn them into that field. And so that's another area to explore potentially for some people as well. So there's a lot that it's a Pandora's box of different opportunities for infectious diseases. You don't need to, if you go into sort of mainstream ID and feel you want to change, there are so many opportunities to do different things along the way. For an ID.
I mean, the other thing to mention about ID is that it really does cross all the different specialties of medicine, because infections and other issues occur in individuals in all different fields of medicine. And so it really is the ID physician that is working with all these other physicians to really take care of those patients' infectious disease problems.
Yeah, I would just echo Dr. Tan's comments. In fact, I sort of joke about that like with the surgeons, I'm really super tight with the surgeons, in part because I end up seeing the most complex cases that surgeons see. And those are cases that they remember. And if you are helpful with those patients and, help treat an infection or otherwise, they remember that, they appreciate that. Infectious disease doctors they tend to be like the bookish people who do well in school. Like, it's just like, we're kind of those people, including the people on this call, like, we like to learn and we continue to learn. And we take care of really interesting things. And I will say that there's also a number of roles administratively that we haven't touched on. So hospital epidemiologists. So every hospital has somebody who is in charge of preventing infections at the hospital. Occupational health. So someone in charge of making sure everyone's vaccinated. And I'll tell you, those are not easy roles to have right now during a pandemic, but people look to those individuals, often infectious disease physicians, for guidance. The other piece is stewardship, which antibiotic stewardship. So figuring out how to best use medications. And we work very, very closely with pharmacists. And so, that's another way that you can do infectious disease. It doesn't mean you're doing that clinically, but pharmacists, the pharmacists I work with are amazing. I mean, they are so clinical. And they're so helpful to me in terms of treating infection and like coming up with creative ways, creative drugs to use that will be easier to use as an outpatient, might be, less toxic to use, the right dosing. So I work very, very closely with pharmacists as well. And there's a whole society of infectious disease pharmacists who again, with IDSA, we're very, very close with that group.
Yeah, I think what else is very interesting is that every single major specialty has a branch of individuals that are interested in infectious diseases. So surgery has an infectious disease society. The OBGYNs have an infectious disease society. So when you think about different types of medicine and different practices of medicine, there always is a branch where there are individuals that are really interested in infectious diseases. And when you look on a national level, the head of the CDC and Dr. Fauci, one of the directors of NIH, they're both infectious disease individuals. And they take on a much more administrative role, which is not an easy role to play, and really work on policy to keep all of us safe. So, that is something else to consider.
I will add the president of Michigan State University. So I'm at the University of Michigan, but Michigan State is, our rival school. And, for those who follow Big Ten football, we have a lot of fun, sort of chiding each other. But their president, Sam Stanley, is an infectious disease physician. He's an MD, PhD. And when he was appointed, the IDSA was pretty excited about that. And I'll tell you what, it's been really interesting, I'm sure, for him during the pandemic. My boss, who's the University of Michigan's president, is also an MD, PhD. He's an immunologist, internal medicine, so not infectious disease, but again, sort of touches on infectious disease with his work in B cells. So it's been an extraordinary time, for infectious disease physicians.
So to stay around the same theme and to go back to the inception, what piqued your interest in ID, in the profession? And, what hurdles did you have to overcome, rather that be academically or personally?
Maybe I can just address that very quickly. For me, it was always a fascination with, the lab. When I started medical school and I started microbiology, I was just fascinated with the fact that there were so many different bacteria and viruses and parasites and so on. And, everything else to me was secondary to infection. So for me, it was a very early stage of my career and my training in medicine. And I sort of ran with that, throughout. So I think it's just getting fascinated with one aspect of the myriad of different choices you have as a physician. Some people know before they start medical school that they are going to be a psychiatrist. Others, I think the majority of us get into medical school and then we find a passion. And for me, it was sort of, the bugs and the bench and, doing those various activities in the microbiology lab that really piqued my interest very early.
For me, I didn't know infectious disease was a specialty until I became a third-year medical student. And I graduated 27 years ago from medical school, so almost 27 years. So, it's kind of interesting, but I really liked pathology. I liked microbiology, and I was like, whoa, wait a minute, there's something that brings it all together. And, it was the complexity of the patients and the fact that you could get an answer and that you could treat someone and they could get better. I had an interest in oncology and hematology. So I think a lot of us who do infectious disease also have an interest in cancer care. And I think that there's some similarities to that. I personally didn't really like doing procedures. I didn't want to be in the operating room. I didn't want to be doing endoscopy. It's something that wasn't personally interesting to me. My background is as a journalist before I went to medical school. And I love that I can have a conversation and tell stories and hear stories and help people tell their story. And I'm still doing that, so many years later, and I'm still learning and I'm still fascinated and just humbled by the people I see. And, their time with me is intense often. And they remember you years later because usually they're seeing me because something went wrong. And I think that's also a privilege to be part of someone's life when there's a lot of disruption.
For me, mine was kind of a combination of what Dr. DaCosta and Dr. Milani said. I was always interested in sort of the biology of things and really enjoyed the biology class that I had in high school. And then when I got into college, I actually did some lab work in an embryology lab. and just completely enjoyed that and was completely fascinated by that and really enjoyed my microbiology courses. And then it just kind of blossomed from there. When I got into medical school, I always gravitated toward individuals that had infections because they just seemed like they were so much more complex and so much more interesting. And, really didn't decide on an infectious disease fellowship until I was a second-year resident. Very much like Dr. Milani, I did like HEMONC and had considered doing HEMONC, but the second day of my infectious disease rotation, something clicked and I was just like, this is what I have to do. I just love this.
It just, your comment made me think about something. I think for me, the mentors I had in infectious disease were also really important, and that I wanted to be a great doctor like these individuals. Like, I just remember being a student and watching people take a history and put together a diagnosis, and that to me was really inspiring. And again, infectious disease doctors tend to be like the teachers that get a lot of the awards. They like to teach. They enjoy, in a way we joke that our procedure is writing a note. Like that's what we do. We write like a very detailed note. And that's what we have to show for it. We're not like operating and putting in new knees or hips or something like that. So it's in a way, it's also the education roles are really important in infectious disease.
Thank you for that. And for those of us, in the audience who aren't interested in going to medical school or anything like that, are there any career options available for them if they're interested in ID?
Absolutely. You can approach ID from many different perspectives. As Dr. Milani mentioned, you could be a pharmacist. If you don't want to go to medical school, you can be a pharmacist. You can be a nurse. You can be an advanced practice nurse, physician assistants. All these individuals, there are many of them that gravitate toward ID and actually practice ID. You can be public health. You can work for a public health department and really do sort of the epidemiology investigations. So there are many, many different avenues where you can practice ID. You don't have to go to medical school to do this. And, I think one of the great things about ID is that we rely on each other to learn and to take care of the patients. And you don't have to be a doctor to do that. So, if you're not interested in medical school, there are multiple other avenues for you to pursue a career in ID.
Yeah, and I can back that up by saying that many of the organizations I've worked for, and some of them have been very large organizations, including the one I work for now, the majority of researchers, majority of scientists, majority of people that work in these organizations are non-physicians, in fact, and they're in various roles. For nurses, I would say in many pharmaceutical and biotech companies, the clinical operations side, where clinical trials are actually executed by these people, most of them have a nursing background, or many of them have a nursing background. And a lot of pharmacists that are working in drug development as well in industry, especially the earlier stages of drug development, drug discovery and development. So lots of opportunity for non-physicians as well to come into the infectious disease arena from a translational standpoint, and also, as was mentioned before, in the public health arena as well. So there are a lot of opportunities.
Okay. Now I'm going to pivot us a little bit. And what's the difference between working in biotech versus pharmaceuticals?
Okay, so that's to a certain extent, there's an artificial dichotomy between biotech and pharma because there are lots of overlaps. Broadly speaking, the goal of pharma and biotechnology is to develop a product that can be commercialized and also have an impact on human health. Now, every company will say that their primary goal is to have a positive impact on human health. The extent to which, a profit motive is important to them varies. But the big distinction, I think, is that biotech companies tend to be more focused on the fundamental science behind a product, behind a virus, a particular pathogen. And use that to tease out a technology that can be used in a translational way. Very often biotech companies tend to be smaller, not always, but they tend to be small, medium-sized, and they get to a point where they don't have the capacity to go beyond manufacturing a prototypic product. They then have to scale up manufacturing, commercialize, and get it approved. And this is where they might partner with a larger company. So you see partnerships between smaller biotechs and larger companies for drug development in many cases. But some biotechs are able to stand on their own feet, like Moderna is a classic example, rather than partnering with a large prototypic pharmaceutical company to have a product. So it varies. There's a spectrum, but technically speaking, the biotechs tend to be the brains behind everything, and pharma has the wheels that turn things into products, and beyond. That's just a sort of a broad perspective on that, but there's a lot of overlap between those two aspects of industry.
Perfect. And, given the emergence of new treatments and as well as preventative methods, what's your thoughts around the presence of ID specialists specializing in HIV care in the future?
I can comment, even though I said I actually don't work in that space. And I think that is the future, is that this is really becoming its own specialty, and it's really a very primary care focused.
Mm-hmm.
The people that work with me at the University of Michigan who do HIV care, these are individuals who also do infectious disease, but around the country, you'll find people who just have been part of this since the beginning, and they didn't do infectious disease fellowships. They just have kept up and they learn. So you see fewer people where it's just like, oh, I just have a couple of patients I see. Although, because medications are becoming pretty simple, relatively simple. I mean, for a while, it was very complicated. Like you're picking 4 or 5 different medicines and combining them. And now it's become like, just take this one pill or take these 2 pills. That it may be that this becomes more of a primary care focus with individuals who spend a little bit of time learning it. And I think this is one where, PAs, nurse practitioners, because so much of it is the psychosocial piece and really addressing social determinants of health. Patients may be medically very vulnerable in this space for a lot of reasons, socioeconomic, also mental health issues. So it's very, very interesting care. And I will say our nurses and our social workers who work within our HIV clinic are incredibly important to the team. And I think the patients really look to those individuals as part of their care team.
Yeah, from a pediatric standpoint, HIV has pretty much become a primary care outpatient issue. Earlier in the HIV pandemic, it was not unusual to have 5 or 10 kids in the hospital at one time with complications from HIV. And I'm sure it was the same in the adult world. But today, it's rare to have somebody hospitalized. The medications are just incredibly effective now. And, with the care that these individuals get, they pretty much are not in the hospital anymore, and they're living pretty normal lives. So it's really incredible what has occurred over the last 20 years with regards to HIV and HIV medicine.
And, what is the most interesting or fascinating thing you've learned while working as an ID specialist or in this profession?
That you always have to keep an open mind. And I'm the kind of person that likes to solve puzzles. And so you're constantly learning. And I think that to me is the most gratifying part of this field, is that you learn something new every single day. You never are bored with what you're doing. And, I don't know how many people can say that about the job that they do. But, speaking for myself, and I'm sure my colleagues on this call, there is not a day that goes by where we don't learn something new, and we're never bored with what we do.
I would just echo what Dr. Tan has said. And I would add also that everything you've learned in the past can be useful to you. And I'm thinking especially of the pandemic. I mentioned that I have a background in journalism. I have a bachelor's and master's in journalism. And the pandemic has been this super interesting time where infectious disease and public health and even geriatrics has come together with the need for clear communication. And so, in fact, I've frequently joined Dr. Tan in press conferences, and we kind of, we talk a lot about like getting back to school, for example. And it's been so interesting, the spaces I've been in, everything from like policymakers and lawmakers and, our state governor, our legislators. And it's just like, that's so different from taking care of patients. But in a sense, that credibility you've built really carries forward. So you never know where you're going to be and what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, and I would add to that in terms of, the bugs themselves. We see how bacteria have evolved through antimicrobial resistance over time. What you used to treat various infections 10 years ago may be different in whether they're, acute infections, chronic infections like TB and so on. HIV is a classic example where, the drug combinations have been developed. Now you have fewer pills, but yet there's a concern for emergence of resistance even today. You're looking at coronaviruses and how they're very quickly evolving, in the context of having had a stranglehold on humanity, and now they're able to establish themselves and evolve, in the face of pressure from new vaccines coming in the face of pressure from public health measures, they're able to adapt. So that's what's really exciting about ID, is that, the drugs are changing all the time, but the bugs are equally changing very quickly, and outsmarting the drugs, outsmarting the scientists. And we just have to keep chasing our tail with these bugs and keep moving along and being adaptable and innovative. And that's what makes it a non-static field, if you like. Most of medicine isn't static, but a lot of it moves much more slowly than infectious diseases, I would argue.
I think above all, you should be having fun when you're learning about these things, and
Right.
keep an open mind, because, you never know what's going to pop up next. And I think that's always the fascinating thing about this field. And, it's very dynamic. It's very rapidly moving, as you can see with the pandemic. And that's what makes it that much more exciting.
Absolutely.
And talking about fun, what's that last piece of advice that you would give to a college student? I know, Dr. Tan, you talked a little bit about having fun in what you do. Is that going to be part of, do you have anything to add to that for a college student as far as like staying on task, time management, things like that? Just, any parting words that you would like to give anybody in the audience, it would be helpful right now. And that's open to every panelist right now.
I mean, first off, you need to have fun at what you're learning. And if you need to stay focused on what you feel that you would like to do. Because in the long run, you're the person that's going to be doing that job. And, you really have to be interested in the job and have fun at doing the job. I don't think Dr. DaCosta or Dr. Milani would be here now if they weren't having fun with the jobs that they were doing. Yes, there are times when it's very stressful. But, overall, I think when all of us look at what we do, we always are learning every single day. We're always having fun at what we're learning. We find it very interesting. And personally, I don't think I would have chosen a different field of medicine. I really love my job and what I do.
I wouldn't choose anything different either. My only quick bit of advice is don't get discouraged. I think there's a lot of like talk that happens that, oh, if you got this grade in organic chemistry, you can't, and like none of that's true. It's, everyone's got their own path. Do your best, get advice, get help, retake classes if you have to. Sometimes that happens. Where you're going to school during a global pandemic, give yourself a little bit of grace.
Yep.
What we ultimately need in medicine are people who are willing to work hard, but have emotional intelligence, not just book smarts, and that there is a way to move forward. The path might be a little bit longer for you or not quite straightforward.
But that doesn't matter. There's no timeline, right? I mean, if your goal is to become an infectious disease doctor, then I would stick to that goal, no matter, you know, if it's you're going straight or there's some detours, but ultimately that's what you want to do, then you really should pursue that.
And I would add very quickly that, you know, when you get into the realm of research in infectious diseases, there is just a broad range of capabilities in terms of income. You know, you might go into industry and stay in industry, and, you know, especially large pharma, you know, lots of high income, highly paid positions for ID physicians as they grow within those organizations. However, you know, just speaking personally from my personal experience, I moved to my current organization, which is a nonprofit organization that pays way less than industry, because I had the interest in the cutting edge science, being part of, you know, the forefront of science. And I haven't enjoyed any job more so than the one I'm doing now, I have to say, because of the science and the impact that I'm seeing that the science is having. You know, it's very easy to be drawn to, you know, positions that pay you well. In medicine. And, you know, when I was a resident, I remember, you know, looking at these lists that came out that's listed various subspecialties and what the physicians earned every year. And you had the sort of orthopedic surgeons and cardiologists and cardiothoracic surgeons at the top, and you had the pediatricians and infectious disease physicians towards the bottom. And many, I know many of my colleagues talked about, you know, I want to do a fellowship in cardiology. I want to do a fellowship and become an orthopedic surgeon. You know, I don't want to be earning that amount. I want to earn that amount. But it's not all about the money. It's about, you know, what passion and drive you have and what impact you can have. I think that's a very important message to send.
And I completely agree, honestly. I couldn't have said it better myself. And thanks to each of you, to our panelists of doctors that are here to talk about this ID profession, to our audience. You know, I can't thank you enough. That being said, our webinar will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. And I just want to say thanks again and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.